Okay. I guess we'll get started. We're going to talk about security this morning and the hype around information security. I've got three terrific panelists. I think I'll start by introducing Natalya Kaspersky, who is the founder of co-founder of Kaspersky Labs, and now the CEO of Infowatch. And then we'll bring up Vincent Steckler, CEO of Avast, and Saket Modi, who's the CEO of Lucideus. He's here all the way from India.
Hey.
CeBIT Global Conferences.
So we're going to talk about security. We're going to talk about the hype. We're going to talk about some of the consumer-facing security issues. We're going to talk about some of the enterprise-facing security issues. We've got kind of a nice mix of panelists here. And I think I want to start by letting everybody sort of take it from the top, as I always say when I'm interviewing someone. Tell us, and Saket, we'll start with you. What does Lucideus do? What do you specialize in? What do you do better than anybody else in the world? And just kind of how do you see the world? Who do you do business with? Let's start there.
Thanks, Arik. I represent an organization which deals with the security of some very large banks, financial institutions. So a lot of tickets that you book online, which is go and click and pay your credit card details. We, of course, go ahead and scan those applications and provide them the vulnerability assessments and then help them in patching this. This is true for banks, insurance companies, financial institutions across the globe. So
primarily in India or globally?
In India, in the Middle East, and North America.
Okay, so you find the security vulnerabilities, help them patch them, and do you do incident response as well?
Absolutely. So a lot of times, a lot of companies come to us saying that, hey, we've been hacked, and we don't know how we've been hacked. One very interesting case was where, it was found out that one of the top 3 ways by which companies come to know that they've been hacked is when a hacker hacks into an application, records the video, and puts it on YouTube. So once a company sees that video, they're freaked out, and they say, whoa, I don't know how this happened, and can you help us to patch it? So yes, we do a lot of incident response where we go ahead and then help them in patching those flaws.
Vincent, Avast. I think of Avast, I think of antivirus software, but as we talked backstage, it's a little more complicated than that. What do you do better than anybody else? Take it from the top.
Okay, thanks. Well, usually when people think of Avast, they think of antivirus, or they think of free, or they think of the two of them together. We call it antivirus because that's what users call it. You can't change a consumer mind when a consumer's called a product something for 25 or 30 years, even if it isn't that anymore. That's what it is. You can't change the branding. But basically what we provide is security to about 30% of all the world's consumer computers run our security software. Generically called antivirus, but remember, consumers have only one protection product on their computer, and it basically has to do everything that the whole stack of security does at an enterprise. So what you may think of as traditional antivirus is a very small part of what it does. We basically protect 30% of the world's consumers on their Windows computers, and we're the second largest provider of security on mobile devices in the world.
Interesting. Now, do you have an enterprise-facing business as well?
We do have an enterprise-facing business, but what I like to usually explain when people ask why are we in the consumer business, it's because in the 1930s there was a bank robber in the United States called Willie Sutton, and a journalist once, nowhere near as smart as our host here, asked him once why he robbed banks, and he said because that's where the money is. We focus on consumer because that's by far the largest and most profitable segment of security.
Makes sense, but it's also probably consumers are more readily targeted on a mass scale, I would say.
Consumers are no longer targeted on mass scales. In the older days, say 10, 15 years ago, the security companies all kind of shared their threat data with each other. It was very valuable. It's how we all protected consumers. We still share data. All the security companies exchange data with each other on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, but it's of no use anymore. Attacks against consumers are very small in scale. There's a huge number of attacks, but they don't target many users, and the threat changes constantly. So it's turned into basically whoever can gather the most threat data. It's a big data game now. It's not mass attacks.
I see. Natalya, let's start with you. You co-founded Kaspersky Labs, and went off, and I think it was called a sister company, Infowatch, and then you took it over as CEO?
It was a daughter company.
A daughter company, thank you.
Right.
Yeah, so tell us, so take it from the top. What do you do better than anybody else? What does Infowatch do?
Well, Infowatch part, it was Kaspersky. Basically, I bought it out from Kaspersky. Now it's my company.
Oh, Kaspersky is your company now?
No, Kaspersky not. I bought it from Kaspersky.
Oh,
so Infowatch.
Okay, got it.
And I turned it into the group of companies which are busy with enterprise security. We do purely enterprise. We have nothing to do with consumers, unlike Avast. And we focus basically on two major sectors. First is protection against the internal threats. By internal, we understand some threats which are called by the staff of the company. And second, protection against targeted attack. Like my colleague Vincent has mentioned, there is a rare now happens that everyone is attacked. Like massive attacks are not in focus anymore. We watch targeted attacks when an exact target is in focus. Like, for example, I don't know, like Sony, yeah?
Yeah.
And then somebody attacks the company and tries to either get the secrets of the company or steal the data or damage the company somehow, et cetera, et cetera. And we try to provide at least some protection. Of course, it is clear that it's impossible to do protection against something what we don't know, because the attackers can use whatever channel. But our idea is to protect from a different angle. I don't know how successful we will be, but we now try to gather several companies and do one roof, one console for a system administrator, where a system administrator might see that different angles of attack has started and maybe block it at the beginning. So we shall see how it's going. But our main business is data leakage prevention, is from protection from inside attacks. And this is a set of monitors which we stand on the network and trying to monitor through confidential information and block the confidential information out.
So how often would you say, we spend a lot of time thinking about, at large companies, we spend a lot of time imagining information security threats coming from outside. But how often would you say, in your experience, is the threat more likely to be someone on the inside? Whether, and sometimes they're overt, someone who's legitimately trying to steal something from the company, and sometimes they may not even know they're being used to steal something from the company. So talk about that nuance too.
Well, by our experience, we actually made a little survey amongst our clients how often different incidents has happened, and by our experience, it's 76% there were the internal.
76%.
76, yes, majority of incidents has come from internal. But it can be easily explained that the number of technical software solutions or any other solutions against internal threats are still not that advanced and not too many exist. You know, it's still on the early stage. Of course, many vendors have DLP, like Symantec and McAfee, all the major has some kind of DLP. But how advanced is it? Is it able to solve the real problems? Still is a big question mark. Therefore, the companies, many of companies still has nothing, no protection against insider threats. So we still need to explain that it's a threat. And therefore, they just don't care. They didn't know until some incident happens, and then they started to think, wow, we should have do something. And then they start looking for some solution, and even in a short notice, which is very difficult to do.
Interesting, interesting. I'm curious because I spent my Christmas holiday covering the North Korea Sony incident. We reported it very early on that Sony was looking at North Korea as a possible source of the attack, and the official story is that is still what happened. I'm curious whether or not any of you thought that was any kind of a watershed. If nothing else, it was a watershed in terms of media coverage. It got a lot of attention in the U.S. media, and I presume in the global media as well. But I'm curious, and Natalya, let's start with you, what your take was on that incident, and whether or not it means anything different going forward other than the attention that it got.
No, I think it was a typical targeted attack.
A typical targeted attack.
Typical targeted attack. Sony was a target, and well, whoever, we don't know yet, whoever was the attacker. And of course, they had a purpose. They knew the infrastructure of Sony, and they knew how to attack it. They probably did have insiders inside Sony who would advise them about the infrastructure, etc.
It's interesting.
And they probably knew how exactly the vulnerable places where to locate the viruses or whatever method they did use. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to prevent such thing, because if you in the middle of attack, then you cannot just protect everything. It is impossible. It would cost you a fortune, and it doesn't make sense. So any company would have some weak places.
Yeah.
And the weakest place will be attacked. So that's a problematic. And there is no solution against a targeted attack at the moment, and I'm not sure that it will be created.
Interesting. Vincent.
Yeah, I think it's kind of analogous to the early days of consumer AV, where the attackers, basically kids, were doing it for publicity. What was unique about the Sony one, it was basically being done for publicity to really kind of force Sony not to release a very bad movie.
It was a bad movie.
It caused the movie to make a lot of money, caused the head of Sony to be fired. Most such attacks, the attacker doesn't want any publicity. They don't want it to be known that they've been in, etc. So I think you can look at it more of kind of a tip of the iceberg. And I think we would also expect Sony had insiders that were involved in it to help navigate the systems. But I think what it points out is that probably anyone who's a meaningful target has been attacked and just doesn't know it.
Yeah, I don't know who originated that quote, but we're going to be, point of fact, I'm going to be hosting an event in San Francisco on April 21, and I'll be interviewing Kevin Mandia, who is known for saying exactly that. Yeah. There are 100% of companies, there's two kinds of companies, he says. They've been hacked, or they just don't know it yet. So I think very, very widely known.
It comes out of the submarine business. There's two types of ships, submarines and targets.
Okay. I like the analogy. Saket, what do you think?
So if you see technically the attack which happened on Sony, it was over 100 terabytes of data which was extracted from within the company and went outside. Now,
I don't mean to interrupt, but we haven't seen 100 terabytes yet. The attackers never released that much data.
Yes.
I have it on my hard drive, so I know how much it is.
No, but then the type of high definition, my point was that the quantity of data was massive, which went out from the networks. And a company as large as Sony, which clearly shows we're not monitoring the amount of data going outside the network on a if not a daily, but a weekly or a monthly basis, that clearly showed that there's a huge lack of not just the technical controls, but also the controls at the process level, which are very crucial in some very large companies and are still missing. So I would say that there's a long way to go to come towards that point where we can say that even the Fortune 50s are secured from the right entities. Right?
That's a data exfiltration. I wanted to come back to you on that specifically because this is your specialty, data exfiltration.
Yes. I wanted to comment on that. Can I? You said the company didn't control the outgoing, basically, information. But if you think of it, any company sends thousands of emails, especially if it's a large company.
Right.
Any company copies lots of files daily. Some of the information might be confidential, some not. How would you differentiate?
Right.
That's the
So-
problem.
so
How
that-
you differentiate legitimate and not legitimate escape of information?
That's-
It's very, very, very difficult to do.
That's where the intelligence comes into and adding context to security. So what has been found out, and I've just read the reports, I've not seen that in the first phase, but that the extraction of data happening, say, after the office hours, adding context to security is what comes into the picture. Secondly, if it is 100 terabytes, even if it's not 100 terabytes, I'm sure there will be a couple of terabytes for sure because it was 4K definition, A terabyte of data suddenly getting spiked over a week.
Why suddenly? It wasn't suddenly.
No, that was a persistent threat, say for a week or 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, if you see a terabyte of data, suddenly that's my point. So you need to monitor that and see
What's going out?
You need to monitor, but you need to differentiate, and that's the point.
Yeah, and I think to butt in that 100 terabytes is trivial these days. I mean, we're probably flowing 20 to 30 petabytes a month, and global companies are operating 7/24. There's not even the concept of business hours. So to flag 100 petabytes, 100 terabytes, just because it's 100 terabytes out of a stream of 30 petabytes a month.
Sure.
I mean, it's tiny, and there's so many ways of masking it. So I think both of them with that you got to have the context and what the data is and where it's going to. It's a much more difficult problem than it used to be.
So I'm curious about another thing. There's sort of when you are under attack, and you're actively under an attack as a company, and your intellectual property is being stolen, as it was in the Sony case, you have the temptation to maybe try to strike back, to try to put up not only a defense, but maybe go on offense. And we actually caught someone, we don't know, we wrote this story, we caught someone trying to prevent the download of some of those released files, and they were actually using Amazon Web Services, which was a no-no. But to try and prevent other people from downloading. And so I'm curious about, there's suddenly kind of a sense in the States anyway, that there's a temptation for companies to try to hack back a little bit, get a little bit more on an offensive stance. I'm curious what you think of that. Why don't we start with you, Saket, and we'll work down the...
Sure. So offense is the new defense. A lot of large penetration testing companies like using that slogan. And one, of course, is a very famous one, offensive security. They carry that name by itself. That going back and striking back and setting the right example is something which all the large companies would love to do. But then the challenge of jurisdiction comes into the picture, where, again, these days it's very easy that within a couple of seconds, you can bounce between 7 to 8 different servers in different continents and do the attack. So I would say that the amount of time and the energy and the resources that would be invested to get down to that root cause of that particular attack is very difficult. And rather than that, of course, I feel the focus should be to accept the fact that a large company is already breached. I mean, there's no doubts in 100% of companies are breached. We just talk about that. And rather than that, so let's embrace the risk and take a informed decision, leadership decision, where we know that this is breached, let's identify the crown jewels and then protect them rather than focusing on the offense is what we generally tell our customers, and they like that, yeah.
Interesting. Vincent, what do you think?
I also spent many years at Semantic before Avast, and that's kind of the analogy of a schoolyard fight where you're in a scrum and someone hits you and you don't know who hit you and you don't know who to hit back. I think generally when you're attacked, you don't really know where the attack is coming from. And then on top of that, it's just as illegal to penetrate a bad guy's system as it is for a bad guy to penetrate your system. I think you got to spend just much more time actually on trying to prevent it, guard against it, make the best of a bad situation. But also, I think what's probably missing, which I think security companies have, which most companies don't have, is you need a lot of researchers on your own staff that have connections into the underworld to find out what's going on, where your data might be, even buying your data back so you can see what the heck was stolen.
Yeah.
The thieves don't have any honor. They will sell you the data back.
Natalya, what do you think?
Yeah, I would completely agree with Vincent. The main problem to attack back is, technically speaking, first, is to know who is attacking. Let me give you an example, attack on Nortel. You know, it was quite known case when Nortel was under attack for 10 years. For 10 practically years. From 2002 till 2012. And they tried everything, they couldn't stop it. They knew about the attack. They knew after 4 years, I think, but they couldn't stop it. And the traces of hackers still remain in the network. So that's a problem.
Against their corporate network.
On the corporate network, yes, on the corporate network. Wow. So that's a problem of attack. Another example is about the Stuxnet virus. Stuxnet left unknown for 3 particular years. It was a virus. So the antivirus company should have taken care about it. I wasn't at the antivirus CEO at that time already, so I can say, okay, the antivirus company should have taken. But for the 3 years, Stuxnet hasn't been recognized. So of course, the main problem that in 90, I would say 5% of cases, the source of attack left unknown. That's the first technical problem. Second problem, of course, that it's absolutely illegal in any country.
Yeah.
You cannot fight back. It's writing of viruses is prohibited everywhere. You just cannot do it, and it is illegal and impossible if you do. And the third problem, of course, how would you attack? You need to have, well, methods. You basically need to have hackers.
Right.
And that's probably not your business.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad that you brought up Stuxnet too, because that was another story I covered. It's a few years old now, but Stuxnet, of course, was malware, a Trojan that was, if you believe what the New York Times wrote, was created by the U.S. and Israeli intelligence to attack Iran, the nuclear infrastructure there, the nuclear research infrastructure.
But they confess, by the way.
Oh,
they could not confess it. And
they could not confess. They could not confess. Yeah. But and apparently it made some. This is interesting. From what I understand, it made some nuclear centrifuges explode in Iran, and so you've got an Iranian controller looking at his screen, thinking that the centrifuge is running normally.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was not, and ultimately it was damaged. It was a very interesting case of industrial espionage, and so that was a friend of mine who's written a book about it, called it the first digital weapon. And so we're now talking about undeclared, state-sponsored cyber warfare at a certain level. I mean, we're talking about some serious James Bond kind of stuff now going on these days. So, I mean, what does this mean for this world that we live in, where, you know, if you make a movie that someone doesn't like, that you might be attacked, when you know, your corporate infrastructure is considered as important as your national infrastructure, and it becomes part of the political discussion, becomes kind of a political target, and can be attacked by someone who wants to damage it or harm it. I mean, what does that say? What is a company to do in this place, in this time? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a very, very dangerous trend. And if we compare the method of making war with, say, rockets, then any rocket costs billions of dollars in the development. And from the point of view to hit the target, it is to do more difficult with a rocket, because most probably the resistant part has some anti-rocket protection, and second, because also it is not very easy to hit an exact target, and of course the cost. And if you compare it with computer attacks, then it costs much less. We would talk about millions.
Pennies on the dollar compared to actual hardware.
I think at least 2 points less. And it is easier to do, and it left most probably anonymous. Well, in the rocket attack, you will always know who has initiated it, yeah, so you can fight back. In this case, it's very difficult, as we discussed, to fight back. And that's the danger. But to damage infrastructure can be dramatical. And that's why, that's why everybody's speaking now about, well, localization rather than globalization. We always hear here on the exhibition, we always hear German software, German security, German Sicherheit, German everything.
Right.
And Germany needs to do that and this. And it's not, well, it's not a simple talk, yes. But companies and the countries and the governments now think that what should we do to protect our country against possible attack?
I mean, you know, we're living in a world now where we have to think about the possibility that, you know, there's not a mutually, you know, during the Cold War years we had mutually assured destruction. We knew we would never launch a nuclear weapon because we'd kill each other, but we could actually do far more meaningful damage to each other by harming our infrastructure if it came to that. It just seems like there's an international norms conversation that has to happen. Anyway, Vincent, I wanted you to weigh in here.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. You know, on one side you can argue that, you know, the U.S. and Israel teaming up to kind of non-lethally destroy Iran's capabilities of making bombs is a good thing. But then, you know, there's a point of view that says, no, it's a government attack against another government. And, you know, if that's legitimate, why isn't North Korea attacking Sony? Because they don't like what Sony's doing legitimate. So it's a very slippery slope. It's undoubtedly cheaper and possibly safer than dropping bombs. I mean, we should remember that, you know, Syria and Iraq's nuclear facilities were destroyed by bombs.
Yes.
And, you know, is that any different than destroying it with cyber warfare, other than, as Natalya says, at least you know who the attackers are. But, you know, some of the other things on that are also kind of interesting. For example, the Stuxnet was planted, I think it was on Siemens control systems.
Yes.
How did that happen? And then on top of that, you know, how was it that Iran, which was embargoed from buying any such equipment, was able to buy all these Siemens control systems? And if the embargo had been properly enforced, was there a need to actually target the centrifuge?
Those are the questions for the diplomats, I'm afraid.
Yes.
But no, you raise a legitimate point, absolutely.
And it's the same thing when you look at, you know, the newest stuff, you know, with the infections on some of the disk drives and all. At times you have to wonder, you know, what kind of cooperation may be going on between various intelligence agencies and manufacturers, because that's not necessarily the easiest stuff to get planted.
Yeah, that's true. Saket, weigh in here.
So what I think of this is that, see, this clearly demonstrates to the world the possibilities of when you go digital, the problems that come along with that. One very interesting point is that if they could make something which can easily go inside, and not easily, but yeah, in whatever ways can go inside and cause damage to the control systems. Now, similar control systems are deployed all over the world. Siemens, as a private company, is providing the same kind of a firmware to multiple types of facilities. And if there are Zerodays which can take this down, I mean, the same thing, if the US is not happy with more countries, they can deploy it out there also. So I feel that this requires the same kinds of importance as a discussion on the nuclear warfare, as a cyber warfare, and we need to have the right stakeholders taking the right responsibilities. And when I say stakeholders out here, the product, like the most powerful parties are the ones with the most intense knowledge about the cyber attacks. Now, that itself is a big topic of I would say, of the dark, because not a country or a company which has a lot of 0 days, for that matter, will not like to come out and say that, hey, you know, I have these 20 0 days and through which I can cause this much of destruction. So it's still a gray area of discussion, and I feel that we are a long way to go from making a safe cyber architecture for the critical infrastructures across the globe.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up 0 days, and why don't you tell the audience, I mean, I presume some of the audience will know what a 0 day is, but for those who don't, why don't you tell us what a 0 day is?
A 0 day simply is a working piece of code which can go inside when I say I can execute that code and plug in that code with an existing, this is a very simplified version, of course, for our audience. You can plug in a code with the existing code or the firmware or the operating system that's running, and you get access of that that particular firmware.
I like to call it the magic door that gets you into the system you're going out.
Yeah, that's even.
Well, what's even better? There's a market for it out there.
Yes.
You can, if you know where to go, you can actually go online and buy zero-day threats. There's pretty much a standard price list and everything, depending on what the target is, what type of computer it is.
1-800-0-DAYS.
Absolutely. And yeah, you can, some are more expensive than others.
Yeah, well, Stuxnet, as I recall, had contained at least 4, and that was what made people think it was a state-sponsored attack because they were expensive.
Multiple.
So, Natalya, I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is because we're at a point now where countries are now starting to consider zero-day vulnerabilities as strategic assets in their, I don't know, I wouldn't know if you call them weapons or do you call them defense. I don't know. What do you think about the zero-day situation?
Well, with vulnerabilities, of course, any software has its vulnerability or its problem. And it's been a long time that the virus writer has been trying to use these vulnerabilities to make their creatures effective. Of course, the companies who are writing software time from time close the vulnerabilities. They always do, like Microsoft, security alerts and updates and everything. But others find some new vulnerabilities, and maybe I could assume, why not, that they intentively leave some of the vulnerabilities in the code to use them with whatever purpose. It cannot prove, of course, but why not? I mean, it is technically possible. And so how to protect against it? Yes, there are scanners of vulnerabilities when you can find some, but mostly known. And there's a list of such vulnerabilities. You can do security updates, but unfortunately, it is always possible to put something new inside which would work differently and which cannot be discovered. And there is no simple software methods how you can fight. Against we getting into the fight of the weapon and the protection. And protection, unfortunately, always one step behind the weapon.
That's the fundamental problem with security. You've got the known unknowns, and then you've got what Dick Cheney would call the unknown unknowns. And so, as you refer to there, so I think a lot of companies now are at a moment where they have seen a lot of the headlines, and they don't want to be the next Sony. They don't want to be the next Anthem. They don't want to be the next what was the big retailer, Home Depot. So when you are out talking to your clients, what is the first thing they need to do? What is the first thing you're advising them to do? And then maybe what's the second thing you're advising them to do? Start with you, Saket.
So when we talk to our clients, and we are an enterprise-facing business, and we have to consult them and advise them many times, the first and foremost thing we tell them that it's time to accept that you've been hacked. Don't stay in a fool's paradise thinking that, hey, I have a large network and I can protect everything. So cyber risks cannot be mitigated. They really need to be embraced, you can say. And today, cyber risks are supposed to be an informed leadership decision. So something which is acceptable to the company, and I know that, okay, these are the places from where I can be hacked. Even if I deploy the best of the technical controls, there is a possibility that I might be breached. So taking that risk into account, we go into production, and then we take the decisions. That's like the first and foremost thing that any company's CEO, CFO, and the CIO needs to accept. Mm-hmm. Right.
Vincent.
I think it's a kind of recognizing what you're trying to protect against. A lot of the noise that's out there is on, for example, government attacks. and realize, basically every government has a spy agency. What's the point of having a spy agency if they can't spy? And realize that you probably can't protect yourself against government attacks. They probably have source code for all of your devices. They know where the flaws are. I studied computer science, and one of the first things you learn is any program longer than 10 lines is guaranteed to have at least one bug. So all of this stuff has massive errors in it. The code's probably poorly written, lots of devices. So forget about it. And you should really be focusing on what you care about, what you think is going to get attacked, and realize that pretty much all the known attacks have been basically flanking operations. It's not attackers trying to brute force into your systems. For example, Home Depot was breached through self-operated point-of-sale machines. Probably something they never thought would eventually lead into their corporate network. I think they spend a whole lot of energy protecting that corporate network and forget about all of the other access points that attackers are going to probe for the weakest point, and you got to be looking for the weakest points.
Mm-hmm. I'll even add to this. It's a very interesting thing that you brought up. Target was breached through HVAC, that's heating and ventilation. So
HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning vendor.
So it was not breached through the IT flaw, the controls which are there in the.
They had access to specific systems that monitored the air conditioning systems in the stores.
Absolutely.
And somehow.
Yeah,
that was fascinating. That was a fascinating story. Natalya, what are you advising your companies to do?
Well, I absolutely agree with both of my colleagues. I only should add to that we call it the threat model. Always start with the threats model. What kind of threats are you expecting most important for your organization, and how would you protect? And then continue it with organizational measures which you would need to take to protect exactly against this kind of threats, and with the technical measures to choose exact software or hardware, how would you protect. For example, if you feel that information in your organization is very important, very critical, then you need to define which information you would protect, maybe to split it on different levels, level number 1, level number 2, and define which measures you would protect against any methods. Well, it's actually a standard approach for any organization to start with the threats model, because you cannot protect from everything. It is clear.
Mm-hmm. I have another interesting thought that occurred to me while I'm up here. I mean, a lot of the people in the audience here are probably wondering, I mean, they're concerned about their company's security, but they're also maybe concerned about their own personal information security, whether it's PC, tablet, phone, what have you. I'm curious what you might advise somebody if, when you can go home and do for yourself. Step 1, step 2, same kind of advice you might give a company to kind of, lock out maybe the NSA if you can, or lock out the, anything. Saket, you had some thoughts on this earlier, I know, Saket, when we were talking beforehand.
And so I'll answer that with two-piece advice. Number one, I see a lot of people being scared with the NSA or the largest intelligence agencies spying.
President Obama listening.
So but I feel that people generally tend to forget that you're concerned about the security of the data that Larry Page or Tim Cook might be providing to the NSA. Now, at the end of the day, your personal data is first in the hands of a private company. Now, Google is a profit-making company versus the NSA, which is a part of the government, which not maybe to the agreement of everybody, but is not supposed to make profits, and it's not supposed to be there to give a good top line. So I feel we should be more concerned about our data being there as a part of a profit-making company rather than the NSA, because they can really do anything with that data, analyze that, sell us not only the ads, but sell that data across. I'm not saying everybody does that, but that's a possibility for the right money. I'm sure they can. So that's one part that we should be more concerned about. Our data should not go in the wrong hands. The second part to my answer would be that, I feel that considering the digital world and the social media and how we are dependent on the mail servers and all of that, we should assume whatever we put on the internet, it can be just an email between my personal email to somebody's personal email. We should assume that is already being watched upon, not just the government, but the private guys, the hackers, everybody. And then there's this very famous saying, it says, fatness is never a problem in the world where everybody's fat. So assume that everybody's fat, everybody's being watched upon, and don't put any data on that channel. I feel that's the most secure thing to do.
Vincent.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things also. First is similar to my colleague. I think everyone kind of gets worked up on government spying and forgets that pretty much all the spying that's going on out there against consumers is basically from businesses. I mean, if you looked at your mobile phone right now, if you got alarm clock apps, photo editing apps, anything, take a look at what they have access to. Why does your alarm clock app need access to your entire phone log? Why, to use WhatsApp, do you have to send to WhatsApp every single one of the contacts in your phone database? And do your friends and business colleagues appreciate that you've just divulged their private information to Facebook? So everyone should take a hard look at that. And that's really where the loss of privacy is coming from. It's not coming from the NSA. It's not coming from the North Koreans. It's coming from private enterprise who makes money off your personal data. The second thing is businesses realize that your weakest point is probably your employees' homes. I think kind of an up-and-coming way of breaking into corporate networks is going to be to break into home routers. Home routers are defenseless. They're bought on price. In fact, Germany and Mexico are the two most vulnerable places. Here because of Fritz boxes. Any place where you've got one ubiquitous router that has lots of known vulnerabilities, it's easy to break in. If you attach your work PC to your home network, or your mobile phone attaches when you get home, it's not difficult for a bad guy in a targeted attack to plant something on your device through your home network, which infects the corporation when you go back into the office.
Natalya?
Yeah, it is very difficult to add something. But if a person seriously thinks about security, he should throw out his smartphone and block his internet access, and he would be secure.
Do you hear it? Everyone listening to that?
Because if you continue to use your smartphone, unfortunately, cannot be sure that you will ever be secure. It's number one. Seriously speaking, if the most information, I completely agree with Vincent, comes from the people themselves. Because we are in this data leakage prevention business, I was many times asked by different media about this case. Then there's naked photos of some important people went off to the internet.
Yeah.
I always was wondering, my first question was always, why the hell they put the naked photos on the
Right,
internet?
exactly, yeah.
If you wanna, just don't put your naked photos on, and then you would not have problems. And the main problem that people do it themselves. They did it themselves, and they complain about their photos escaped to someone. Look, that's something, that's something contradictional. If you want to be safe, just be safe. It's easy like that.
Yeah, that's true. Great. We are officially out of time. So I want to give a hand to our esteemed panelists here, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.